In the last couple of videos I built a stud wall and hung some French doors. You'll find links to those in the description box below if you haven't seen them already. And in this one I'll be doing taping, filling, architrave, skirtings, gap filling and decorating before a final reveal of the 2 finished rooms. I'll also talk about the total costs of the job and what I'd do differently if I were to do the project again. Some of the footage in this video may be out of sequence, that's just because I've tried to group bits of footage together in a way that works best for the flow of the video. Before hanging the doors, the MDF door linings needed to be prepped, so I sanded those, and this is just the cheapest of the cheap MDF, low quality stuff, and I know a lot of people struggle to get a decent paint finish, particularly on the end grain of MDF, so this is my method. After sanding at 100 grit, I do a coat of acrylic primer, then I denib, sanding gently with some 240 grit, and then a top coat or possibly 2 of a good quality satin wood paint. We're using some of this Dulux Once, which is actually oil based. I prefer to work with water based paints, but this is just what we could find in the shop at the time. But that's all you really need to do with MDF. You don't need to buy any fancy MDF sealer products. As long as you denib between coats, you'll get great results. Onto filling and taping, I'm using some of this scrim mesh tape which helps to reinforce the filler that I'll be adding and prevent cracks appearing in future. It's slightly tacky, so you can just stick it on and fill right over it. The filler I'm using here is Easy Fill. It's good stuff. The best part about it, in my opinion, compared with other fillers, is how easy it is to sand once it's dry. And once our electrician had fitted a light switch, you can see that the cable here goes up into the loft. I can then start filling all the screw holes too. The biggest gap to fill was the one I mentioned in the first video though, and to fill that, first I glued up a few bits of timber to fill the gap, leaving roughly a 12.5mm gap at the front where I'll be attaching a piece of plasterboard. And just in case you don't remember, the reason that this gap is here is because I didn't want to move a light switch on the other side of the room. I secured the timber to the brick wall with roll plugs and some 80mm screws. And then I cut a piece of plasterboard to fit into the space, which got secured to the timber with some drywall screws. I added more scrim tape and then I could work on filling the gaps and getting a consistent finish on the face of the wall and in the corner to make it look like that gap was never there. I did 2 coats of the Easy Fill. The second coat was just a thin skim coat to make sure I got good coverage. On the other side of the wall, I needed to work on filling the area above the plasterboard and the face of the beam, and also filling where that electrical cable was put in. And in the video where I built the wall, I mentioned that I tried to get the plasterboard flush with the face of the beam, but this was when I realised I hadn't done as good a job at that as I'd hoped, unfortunately, particularly on this side of the wall where there was about a 3mm lip, so I needed to do multiple coats to build up the surface and get it flush. By the way, the hawk I'm using here is handmade. It's just a piece of plywood screwed and epoxied to a wooden handle, and then I coated it in a few coats of varnish. It just saved me the time and effort of going out and buying one, and it actually worked great. For the gaps at the top between the plasterboard and the beam, I used decorator's caulk. And I like to do 2 applications of this as well because it has a tendency to shrink a little, so I wait about a day for the first to dry and then apply a second coat on top. Once all of the filler is dry, I can then move on to sanding, and I'm using 100 grit to get everything nice and smooth, and then I brush away all of the dust with a broom. Then it was on to painting, and this is where you get to see just how good a job you did at filling because the paint tends to highlight any dodgy areas. Fortunately, I've had loads of experience filling holes, so any touch-ups that were needed later were pretty minimal here. Usually I'd use a roller, but we were running short of paint, and rollers tend to be a bit paint hungry, so I did it all with a brush this time. Next came fitting the Architrave. I bought the primed MDF bullnose type, and I like to do most of the painting of these before installing them. I start by cutting the miters and installing the upright pieces either side of the door. I'm using a construction adhesive to stick them on. And you'll see I'm leaving a small 5mm or so reveal of the door lining, and I just want to make that gap consistent all the way up and down. I had a few brad nails which aren't really needed for strength, to be honest, as the adhesive grabs straight away, but the nails will just make sure nothing moves while the glue dries. And then add a bit of filler to the nail holes, which will get touched up with some more paint later. For the top piece, I cut one side at 45 degrees and leave the other side long, and then I offer it up and position it to see if the angle looks good. This one doesn't. You'll see that the gap is bigger at the top than the bottom. So I'm going to take about 1/2 millimeter, maybe 1 millimeter off, just by adjusting the angle slightly and cutting at the miter saw. I tend to do all of this by eye, no measuring. I can then offer it up again, mark up the miter needed on the opposite side and cut that end to whatever angle lines up with my pencil marks. It doesn't need to be perfect, that's why decorator's caulk exists, it just needs to be close to perfect. I can then apply more adhesive and stick it in place, and I'm adding it to the ends too, as this stuff is paintable, so it'll help to fill any small gaps that might be there, and I can touch up again later with paint. The opposite side of the wall was done in exactly the same way, except this time I also wanted to cut a notch in the top piece to receive the latch that I added in the last video. I cut that with a chisel. And then just to add a bit more strength, I drilled and countersunk some holes either side and drove in a couple of screws, just in case anyone tries to shove this door open with some force at any point in the future. Those holes then got filled with a couple of coats of filler and then sanded and painted, so you'd never know they were there. For the skirting boards, I had a few tricky decisions to make, as the skirting boards on one side of the room measured about 90mm and on the opposite side they measured 80mm. So I'm going to rip some of the width off the boards at the table saw before fitting them and just try to balance out those differences as best I can, so that when you look around the room the difference in height hopefully shouldn't be too noticeable. This first piece I'm ripping down just ever so slightly higher than the skirting that it will butt up to. You'll see that I've cut this to a length slightly longer than needed, and that's because I want to scribe fit it. I set my compass to the overlap difference, and then I can scribe the opposite end to the shape of the existing skirting. I cut out that shape using my jigsaw. And then it slides right in place, and you'll see here it's about 5mm higher than the old board, again because I'm trying to balance out those height differences. And later on I can try and make up that difference by using a bit of caulk and repainting the old board to blend in with the new. That got fixed in place with some more adhesive, and I didn't bother using any nails here as they weren't really needed. With this adhesive I do like to compress it and then lift it off and push it on again. Apparently when the air gets to the adhesive and you just kind of smudge it around a little bit, that just helps it to grab hold better. The skirting on the opposite side had to be ripped down so that it was a little bit taller to match the adjoining board. And you'll see I have this gap to fill too. I thought about removing the old board, but that was going to make a real mess of the wall because it's been plastered in place probably decades ago now, so I decided to patch in a new piece, which again I scribe fitted. It was a little bit tight when I tried fitting it, so needed some adjustments, which I did with a knife. And then it fitted, but it didn't look particularly good to be honest. But by the time this is caulked and filled and later painted, it's going to be pretty difficult to tell the filler piece was ever there. On screen now is a reminder of how the space looked before I built the wall, and some images of the two finished rooms. First of the dining room, and then the office space / guest bedroom. And if you're looking at Ria's desk thinking she really needs something a little bit nicer, don't worry, that will be a future project. So now onto the total costs of the project. I spent about £30 on timber, £30 on plasterboard, £40 on insulation, £22 on Architrave, about £20 on skirting, £10 on filler, and £1 on decorator's caulk. So in total, it was just over £150, that's excluding paint. I didn't use the full pack of insulation though, so I've got half of that left over. If I were to do this project again, there are a few things I'd do differently. I know some people who commented on my first video will be expecting me to say I'd have cut the carpet back rather than laying the wall on top of it. But I've read all of your comments and still don't see potential for any problems occurring from doing it the way I did it. I know that what I did isn't considered the right way to do it, but I'm confident it'll be fine. There were a couple of comments with suggestions about how to build the wall more efficiently though, and also about fitting the doors that I think I will definitely learn from for next time, if there is a next time. I would definitely have been more careful positioning the wall and checking the offset for the plasterboard in relation to the beam so that I wouldn't have to spend so much time filling and getting everything flush. And one mistake I made, which I didn't mention in the video, and I'm a bit surprised that no one spotted and mentioned actually, is that I made sure to center the door handles horizontally to the door stiles on one side, but I completely forgot to account for the rebate on the edge of the door, meaning that on the opposite side, the position of the handle on the right is off center to the stile. So that was a bit silly, I just didn't think it through, but it's not the end of the world, and if I really wanted to, I could probably move it over a little anyway. Aside from that, I'm really happy with how things turned out. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe for more weekly woodworking content. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can do so via PayPal. And if you'd like to see some exclusive content, including some more house renovation projects, plus get early access to my videos, free project plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos, you can sign up to either YouTube channel membership or Patreon, and there are links to both in the description box below. Thank you for watching.